Healing didn't come from closure, and accepting that truth was one of the hardest parts of the journey. For a long time, I believed healing required a final conversation, a sincere apology, or a clear explanation that made everything make sense. I waited for a moment that would tie the pain into a neat ending. That moment never came, and eventually, I realized it didn't have to. Acceptance arrived quiet, not as relief, but as understanding. It meant acknowledging what happened without needing to rewrite it into something more bearable. It meant letting the story exist as it was, imperfect and unresolved. Acceptance didn't erase the pain, but it softened its grip, allowing me to breathe again. I learned that healing is less about answers and more about permission. Permission to feel hurt without justification. Permission to grieve without a timeline. Permission to move forward even when parts of the past remain unclear. That shift changed everything. The first lesson I learned was about trust. I had believed that trusting deeply was a mistake, a weakness that needed correction. Over time, I understood that trust is not foolish. It's brave. It requires openness, courage, and a willingness to risk being hurt in order to connect meaningfully. Trust doesn't become invalid because it was broken. The act of trusting still reflects integrity, hope, and emotional strength. Betrayal doesn't erase the value of what was offered. It only reveals the limits of the person who couldn't honor it. Learning this helped me stop resenting my past self. I no longer viewed my openness as naivety. I saw it as evidence of my capacity to love, to believe, and to show up fully. Those qualities didn't disappear with betrayal. They were still mine to protect and share intentionally. The second lesson was harder to accept, but deeply freeing. Betrayal reveals more about the betrayer's unresolved struggles than it does about your worth. At first, this idea felt dismissive of the pain, but over time, it became clarifying. People betray for many reasons, most of them rooted in fear, insecurity, or avoidance. Some lack the tools to handle conflict. Others prioritize comfort over honesty. Understanding this didn't excuse the behavior, but it removed the false belief that I had caused it. I stopped asking what I could have done differently to prevent the betrayal. I began asking why someone would choose harm over accountability. That shift redirected responsibility to where it belonged. It allowed me to reclaim parts of myself that had been buried under self-blame. This understanding also changed how I viewed others. I became more attentive to patterns, to inconsistencies, to how people handle discomfort, not with suspicion, but with awareness. Awareness became a form of protection rather than a barrier. The third lesson was the most empowering. Walking away can be an act of self-respect, not weakness. For a long time, I equated endurance with strength. I believed staying, forgiving endlessly, and absorbing pain were signs of maturity. Letting go felt like failure at first. It felt like giving up on something that once mattered deeply. But over time, I realized that staying in a relationship that harms you repeatedly isn't loyalty. It's self-abandonment. Choosing distance wasn't about punishment. It was about preservation. It was about recognizing that some connections can't be repaired without mutual effort, and that healing sometimes requires separation. Walking away allowed space for clarity. Without constant emotional turbulence, I could finally hear my own thoughts. I could reflect without defending myself. That quiet became fertile ground for growth. As I healed, I began redefining what strength looked like. Strength became honesty with myself. It became setting boundaries without guilt. It became choosing peace over familiarity. I also learned that healing isn't about becoming indifferent. It's about becoming grounded. The memory of what happened still exists, but it no longer controls my reactions. It informs them without overwhelming them. Maybe the question isn't why people betray, but why we're taught to endure pain silently when they do. Society often praises resilience without addressing the cost. We admire those who endure without complaint, but we rarely ask what that endurance demands. Why are emotional wounds expected to heal invisibly? Why is speaking about hurt seen as weakness, while suppressing it is seen as strength? These questions matter because they shape how people process pain. If emotional injuries were treated with the same seriousness as physical ones, healing might look very different. There would be more patience, more validation, and more support. people wouldn't feel pressured to move on before they're ready. This story isn't just about one betrayal. It's about how we collectively respond to emotional harm. It's about whether we create spaces for honesty or force people into silence. It's about whether we value connection enough to protect it. If this story resonates with you, let it remind you that your pain is valid. You don't need permission to grieve a friendship. You don't need to justify your hurt. What you felt mattered because the connection mattered. Be gentle with yourself in moments of doubt. Healing doesn't require perfection. It requires compassion. Some days will feel lighter than others. That fluctuation doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. Be gentle with others too, without abandoning your boundaries. Empathy doesn't require self-sacrifice. Understanding doesn't mean tolerating harm. Both can exist at the same time. Healing begins when we choose empathy over bitterness. Bitterness promises protection, but often deepens isolation. Empathy, when directed inward first, creates space for integration and growth. Healing begins when we choose awareness over denial. Denial may offer temporary comfort, but awareness offers long-term peace. Facing the truth, even when it's painful, allows real change to occur. Healing begins when we choose growth over staying where we are no longer safe. Growth often requires difficult choices, including endings we didn't want, but those endings can become beginnings in ways we don't immediately see. Over time, you may find yourself trusting it, not blindly, but thoughtfully. You may open up in new ways, guided by wisdom rather than fear. That evolution is not loss. It's maturation. The scars of betrayal don't disappear, but they don't have to define you. They can become reminders of your resilience, your capacity for reflection, and your commitment to emotional integrity. In the end, healing is not about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming honest, grounded, and self-aware. It's about choosing relationships that honor your presence rather than diminish it. And perhaps the most powerful realization of all is this: you are allowed to heal at your own pace. You are allowed to let go without guilt. You are allowed to choose yourself again and again, even when the past still echoes.